It's time for the Daily Planet podcast show. So sit back, relax, and give us a go. Scott and Matt and maybe a guest, undertaking an epic pod quest. We're gonna ramble on about movies and books and television and directors and film festivals and this really long list of stuff that I know nothing about, but they gave it to me and they really wanted me to read through it. And that's all I can really say about it, but it's gonna be great. Okay, start the show.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Planet Podcast, your weekly podcast for all things movies, TV, books, and whatever else we feel like talking about. My name is Scott Daly, and I am your host, and I'm joined this week by my co-host and Planet Earth's predominant alien linguist, Matt Freeman. Matt, how's it going?
Kapla.
Wait.
What? I don't actually know any alien languages, but I
Was that Klingon?
I was attempting.
Did you just do a thing?
I was attempting Klingon, but I'm pretty sure any Klingons out there would be disgusted by my pronunciation.
Matt.
Yes.
It's Klingon. They're not real people.
Scott, that is so insensitive. and as we are implying, today we're going to be talking about Arrival.
Yes, the 2016 Golden Planet Best Picture winning film by Denis Villeneuve. Matt, why are we randomly talking about this 2-year-old movie in the middle of April when we could be discussing the complex layers of Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's rampage?
Well, Scott, first of all, I can't believe we haven't had a whole episode devoted to this, but at this point, it's because it's time for another one of our backer reward episodes. Those that have pledged to us at the $20 level get the opportunity to pick a topic, any topic, and have us talk about it. This time around, it was Patron Aimee who wanted us to spend some time talking about Arrival.
Yeah, and like you said, we've talked about this movie, you and I, a few times. I think maybe on the What We've Been Watching sections, and then, of course, when we awarded it that award at the end of 2016. But we've never had an episode fully devoted to this movie, which is insane because we both really love this movie.
Yeah, we both saw it in theater, I believe. So
yeah, and it's interesting because one of my friends in my group chat who didn't know that I was doing a podcast on this movie this weekend happened to text me this morning and just said randomly, I think Arrival is going to be one of those movies that's like one of the things that we remember coming out of this decade as far as film goes. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, I was, not that I was concerned that it wasn't going to hold up, but when I watched it again today, it was just as perfect as I remembered it. And I mean, this is the thing I think that put Villeneuve on everyone's radar, or at least mine. I mean, I know he'd done a couple other things before this, and I'd even seen one of them, but I wasn't like, oh, this is my new favorite director. But with this movie, I pretty much was, and then he kind of cemented that with Blade Runner. So
yeah. So this is going to be a full spoilers discussion of Arrival because this is an older movie. We are not going to do the non-spoiler section versus the spoiler thing. So if you haven't seen Arrival, go do that.
Yeah.
And then come back.
Yeah, I don't know what else we can say to make it sound good to you at this point.
Yeah. And we're gonna do some What We've Been Watching here at the end of the show. But first, Matt, we've got some news to talk about.
This is Daily Planet News. I didn't like that.
So we talked a couple weeks ago, I think that was when we were sitting around a really loud waterfall, about the Netflix and Cannes battle, as it were, that's happening. And there's some new wrinkles in this whole thing, Matt, so I wanted to bring this back up and talk about this for a little bit.
Exciting.
Before we did that, though, I think it might be a good idea to just set the stage a little bit, because this is actually kind of a complicated story, why we are at this point, why these two giant important things in cinema are now fighting each other. It all started last year at Cannes. When Netflix brought two movies to the competition. They brought Okja and the Meyerowitz stories. Those are actually two of, I think, some of the best movies Netflix has made so far, and definitely some of the best of last year. They did pretty well in competition, and Netflix wanted to use their normal model to release them in France on their streaming service at the same time they were releasing them everywhere else, like they always do. This, Matt, did not make the Union of French Theater Owners happy, though, because in France, there is a law on the books that says you cannot release a movie on a streaming service until 36 months after it's been released in theaters. So basically by Netflix saying, we're going to release this day and date with our other, like our other locations around the world, they were basically saying, no, you can't do that. So Netflix just said, okay, fine. We just won't release it in theaters in France at all. And that way we skirt around your silly law. And shockingly, nobody in France liked that either. So what happened was, after Cannes was over, in the summer last year, the Cannes is pretty tightly knit with the French cinema owners, which is not a surprising thing at all. But they changed the rules and said any film that refuses to commit to a theatrical release in France is barred from competition. And they made it very clear here that they were specifically making this rule for Netflix. They mentioned Netflix by name in this new ruling, but of course that would apply to any other streaming service as well. And they said that they could still come to the competition. They could still come to the festival. They were not banned from the festival. They just could not compete. So they couldn't get any of the awards and the prestige that goes along with those awards. Fast forward a year later, and Cannes said, yeah, no, we meant that, and we're definitely still doing it. And Netflix, this is the new wrinkle, because Netflix has now responded, and they've said, fine, we're not coming at all. We're out entirely. And Ted Sarandos who's the chief content officer at Netflix, did an interview with, I believe it was Variety, and he had some interesting things to say as well. He said, we loved the festival. We loved the experience, our filmmakers, and for film lovers. It's just that the festival has chosen to celebrate distribution rather than the art of cinema. We are 100% about the art of cinema. And by the way, every other festival in the world is too. So this is where we're at. These two things are battling it out, and us movie lovers, Matt, are kind of caught in the middle here. So what's your thoughts on all of this?
I mean, this seems like a defensive battle by an entrenched, incumbent trying to stave off change and probably going to lose. But it's just not a smart move on Cannes' part, because first of all, like, unless you're a film nerd, you've never heard of them. And even if you are, like, it just doesn't, I don't know. It doesn't seem to matter much. It seems like this was bad politics on their part. But I guess I see why they made this choice. I don't know.
Yeah. So one of the things I've been seeing around the film Twitterverse is people feeling like they need to take sides in this conflict. That you're either on the side of Cannes or you're on Netflix's side. And most people seem to be on Netflix's side because, let's be honest here, Cannes is a little pretentious and stuck up and trapped in their ways. However, I argue that both of these people are assholes, and I don't want to pick a side. I think they're both wrong. I think Netflix has this idea that, like, when Sarando said in this quote, we are 100% about the art of cinema. No, you're not. You want to be a disruptor in the cinema model. You want to tear down. Netflix would love it if movie theaters stopped existing. That is their goal. They want all people to watch stuff on their platform. And if that means they're not going to the movies anymore, great. So theaters, the cinema, is an important aspect of the art of cinema. So for Netflix to posture like, oh, we're just 100% about the art is not reality.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's definitely, two corporate entities trying to claw at each other and see who can come out on top. But it's just I think the whole problem is this 36-month rule, which is completely hamstringing. That just doesn't make sense. Like that makes no sense at all. It just, like, it's a rule where people don't want that, I'm sure. The customers don't want that. The only people who want that are the people who own the cinemas, because it forces people to go to the cinemas. Like that's just silly. That's just silly.
Yeah, I mean, to Netflix's credit, they tried to negotiate here. They said, okay, we'll do day and date in France. The same days we put these movies in the cinema, we'll do via the streaming platform. And the theater owners and the government of France was like, no, you can't do that. That's not the law. Yeah, and I understand why that law was passed, but I agree with you there. I think, first of all, 36 months is kind of over the top. I understand, like, in the U.S., we have a lot of arguments about this, and most of the big production companies and the theater owners have agreed that for a lot of movies, day and date is something they don't want, so they don't want it released in theaters the same time it's released on a streaming platform, but it's usually like maybe there's like a week or two run before it drops on Netflix or on Amazon or what have you. 36 months is insane.
Right. Yeah. It's people are just gonna not go to the theater if
Right.
Yeah, it's silly. I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. And I'm not gonna say I side with the corporate entity against the other corporate entity, but like you can say which one's going to win, I think.
Yeah, I mean, Netflix is not going away.
Right.
The ship on cinemas being the big thing they were has already sailed.
Yeah.
My big thing, the important thing to me, is that I get the opportunity to see these movies the way they were meant to be seen, and as long as that happens, I don't care if it comes out on Netflix the same day, because I know me, and I know I'm going to go to the theater if I have a choice.
Yeah.
It is a real bummer that for the rest of the world, nobody got to see Annihilation in the theater. It came out on Netflix there. It never had a theatrical release. They didn't get to see it that way. And I really feel like that's a movie you need to see in the theater. And I think it's a bummer that some people won't get that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's going to be a massive reshuffling of how things work, and it's all going to come out okay in the end. And in this interim period right now, there's going to be a lot of Annihilations not getting in theaters, and a lot of Netflix is not going to Palme d'Or Festival or whatever it's called. And
that's the award at the Cannes Festival.
Yes. And it's going to be painful, and then we're going to come out the other side of it in a place that is happier.
Yeah, and like we talked about a couple episodes ago, I am all for Netflix continuing to make movies and pushing artists that we've never seen before and never would have gotten the opportunity to make a movie in the old studio system. So I support them as disruptors. I wish they were a little more interested in playing the theater game, just a little bit. But, I mean, they've made it very clear that they are not. That is not their business model. That's not what they care about.
Yeah,
Amazon, it's interesting because Amazon is trying to do a very similar thing, but they are approaching it from a more traditional aspect, in which Amazon movies get theatrical releases and then they come to Amazon. And that's kind of the way they do things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll see which model wins, right? I imagine they both have a theory of how their model is going to make them more money, and one of them is probably more right than the other.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing that we're definitely seeing is that Amazon's model has earned them more prestige for sure. Their movies win Academy Awards. They get Palme d'Ors at film festivals and all this other stuff. So I don't know if prestige translates into money to the point where it's something that Netflix would want a piece of. Clearly not.
Right. Not so far. We'll see.
Yeah, we will see. All right. So that's the continuing battle. I think Cannes is going on. I don't think it's now, but it's very soon. So
okay.
Maybe we'll have some news about the hot movies coming out of there that we'll all need to see in a year or two if they ever actually come out.
Yeah.
You never know.
Exciting time.
But Solo is premiering at Cannes, which is surprising.
Yeah. Remember when everyone's opinion of that movie changed after one trailer?
Do you mean just ours? Because My opinion completely changed.
Mine did
after
too.
That one trailer.
Yeah, no, it was like I was so over it, and then that new trailer came out, and I was like, oh, okay,
Oh, I see what you're doing now.
yeah,
This might be good.
yeah, this might work.
Yeah. Yeah, it is premiering at Cannes, which is another thing people are like, "Oh, it's going to be at Cannes. It might be good." And I need to remind the world that Attack of the Clones premiered at Cannes. And so that means nothing.
Yeah,
It just means that they want to drum up some hype.
yeah,
That's it.
right,
That's it.
exactly.
All right, next piece of news. Batgirl has a new writer. It has been over a month since Joss Whedon dropped out of the project, Matt, because he couldn't find a story there, and they finally made a new writer. So it seems that this movie, unlike many of the DC movies, is going to actually happen.
Amazing.
So the new writer is Christina Hodson, who most recently penned this year's Bumblebee, the Transformers spin-off movie starring Haley Steinfeld. So we don't know anything about the quality of the writing of that movie, you know, so we can't really make a call here whether this is good news or bad news. They found a woman to write this, which is positive. I think. I think we said when Joss Whedon dropped out that's probably the way they should go. That they should find a woman to do it. But yeah, we don't know. Maybe Bumblebee is going to be great, and then we'll be like, oh yeah, Batgirl.
Yeah, I do have a soft spot in my heart for Transformers films, and I mean, look, you could definitely write a good Transformers film. There's nothing inherently bad about the premise of Transformers, and you could argue that there's some hidden genius in the Transformers films too. So yeah, no, it's true. We don't know whether this is good news or not. I guess I'm always tentatively excited to see if DC has finally figured out how to make their formula work.
Yeah. I mean, so we'll definitely be paying close attention to that Bumblebee movie when it comes out in December. The first non-Michael Bay Transformers.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
I think the guy directing that is one of the guys from Laika, the stop motion animation studio.
Oh, cool.
So that's kind of got me positive too.
Yeah.
So it's got a writer that is a real writer and not like a committee of writers. It's got a director whose previous work I've liked a lot. It's got Haley Steinfeld in it, who is a very talented actress that I really like. So maybe Bumblebee's going to be good.
Yeah.
And then maybe Batgirl's going to be good.
I can accept that either of these things might be true.
Also, Christina Hodson is rumored to be working with WB and DC on the Birds of Prey movie that we've heard a little bit about over the last few years. Margot Robbie is supposedly going to be in this movie playing Harley Quinn again. We don't know much else about it besides that, but it seems like they're still working on it. The DC universe is a real mystery right now. There's an Aquaman movie supposedly coming out this year, but I don't know if I believe that.
I've heard nothing about that. It's already April.
It's coming out in, I think it's November, maybe December. We haven't seen a teaser or anything. I don't know. After Justice League, I think they're worried.
Yeah, I'm worried too.
Yeah. All right. Finally, some news that just broke a couple hours ago at the time of our recording. R. Lee Ermey has passed away. Most well known for his role as I think he was the gunnery sergeant on Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket. He was 74 years old and had some complications with pneumonia, I guess. So we lost him this week, as well as Milos Forman, who was 86. He was a director that did One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, won him an Academy Award. He did Amadeus, he did People vs. Larry Flint, and he did Man on the Moon. So it was a weekend of losing icons here, Matt.
Wow, yeah. I feel like a terrible person for not knowing his name, despite loving all of the films that I've seen on that list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's interesting because a movie or a documentary just came out about Jim Carrey on Man on the Moon. I think we talked about it on the show before, where he was just kind of showing how Jim Carrey was so into character that he was an asshole. And the director was Milos Forman, who was having to deal with Jim Carrey being a total asshole. And you really got to see his struggle and frustration to get this movie made. And I love One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but that is what I thought when I heard this news. I was like, oh God. I mean, 86 is nothing to sneeze at, though. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
He had a full life, a full career.
Yeah. Yeah.
And R. Lee Ermey, too. I guess 74. I don't know. Like, maybe it's just because I'm getting older that 74 seems really young to me now.
I think the difference is like when you begin to know more people who are older than that, then you realize like, oh, that person could have passed away before now, and then that would be sad.
Yeah,
but
that's true.
You don't know that many people over 86 anyway.
Yeah, I have uncles that are over 74 now, so that's, yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly.
All right, so rest in peace to those two brilliant performers and directors, and I kind of want to go, as always happens with me when this happens, is I want to go back and revisit some of their work. I haven't watched Full Metal Jacket in forever. The weirdest part to me, Matt, is R. Lee Ermey is great in Full Metal Jacket, but the movie I think of when I think of him is Saving Silverman. Did you ever watch that movie? Michael and I used to watch that movie so much.
It sounds familiar. I think so, but probably in college and half paying attention.
Yeah, it's the silly Jason Bateman and Jack Black movie where Jason Bateman is dating a horrible woman, so they kidnap her.
Yes.
And fake her death.
Yes, I've
so they can hook him up with a nun.
Excellent.
And R. Lee Ermey plays their football coach who ends up being gay, and it's such a ridiculously fun movie.
Yeah, I can't say that I know what this person looks like. So as you said, what I'll probably do is watch movies that have them and then come to an appreciation of them now that they've passed.
Yeah. All right. So that is it for the news. Let's talk about Arrival.
All right.
Not everyone is wired for what you're about to do.
So what do they look like?
You'll see soon enough.
Every 18 hours, a door opens up. That's where we go in.
It's done.
Yeah, that just happened.
What happens now?
They arrive.
They need to see me.
Dr. Banks? Are you insane?
Now that's a proper introduction.
So, okay. Again, let's one more warning that this is full spoilers. We are going to discuss the whole movie in great detail. And this is probably, like, I'm not a big person about spoilers, Matt, but this is probably one of the ones I would strongly suggest not listening to if you haven't seen the movie.
I agree.
Just because a lot of the movie working on you on an emotional level comes from the twist, if it could be called that. I guess it's a twist, right? Like,
yeah.
It counts as a twist.
I think it's the kind of thing where it recontextualizes things once you are aware of new information. So, yeah, I think that counts.
Yeah, so this is Denis Villeneuve's film, as we mentioned at the top, written by Eric Hesserer and based on a short story, The Story of Your Life, by Ted Chiang. Stars Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner, Forrest Whitaker, and I love this movie. Matt, why don't you talk about your history with this movie before we get into analyzing it?
Yeah, so I had read the short story years ago. I think actually maybe the year it came out, because I had like a science fiction anthology and it was in there, and I read the story, and either my memory of it was wrong or the story is very different, or both. I think both is actually the case, because when I watched this movie, I kind of had a certain smugness of like, yeah, well, I already know this story, but it'll be neat to see how they do it. And this movie still managed to, one, of course, be a complete emotional, roller coaster and devastation, but also to surprise me, because it executes kind of on the science fiction concept in a way where I didn't expect it and I didn't see it coming. So, yeah, it's an amazing movie, and I love it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I first saw this movie at Fantastic Fest of 2016. And it was one of those things where you're sitting by yourself in a theater surrounded by people you mostly don't know and crying, like weeping openly.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was any shame, I didn't feel it, because I think everyone in the theater was weeping openly by the end of this movie. And it's not even like it wasn't even, I don't think it's a sad cry. I think this movie ends on a happy cry for me, because or I guess a bittersweet rather. I don't know. We'll get into it.
Yeah.
But it was one of those things where you're at a film festival, everyone's energy is a little high. You're like kind of in this, you kind of step into an alternate universe when you're at a film festival, and your reaction to movies is very different than when you're just going to a theater on a Saturday night to see a movie. So I always kind of worry that my fondness for a movie coming out of a film festival is based on that festival magic. But then I went and saw this movie with my wife when it came out and was blown away once again. And I've watched it probably 3 more times since then, including when we watched it in preparation for this podcast. And it has the same effect on me every time. It is beautiful. It is devastating. It is inspiring. I cry. I am completely moved by everything. I am in awe of all the elements of filmmaking that come together to make this thing one of the best movies I've ever had the pleasure of sitting in front of. And I love this movie.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I just watched it again today in preparation for this, and it's one of these movies where you can point out kind of any aspect of it and just spend an hour talking about just that. And like, what I mean is, you could look at just the way it's shot, the composition of things, where the camera chooses to focus, and how it treats, objects in the background to frame a shot and to remind you of the context of a thing, or to subconsciously prime you on something, which it does almost all the time. The script, which is the script or the story, depending on how you want to frame it, is exactly the sort of like giant air quotes boring sci-fi that we don't get enough of, and just it's so rare that it gets made, and we're so lucky that this movie exists at all, because like when you think about just the concept and the script, it's like boring, straightforward alien first contact story, which I feel like we're culturally not capable of having a movie like that. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does. Especially because like this movie is a sci-fi alien story coding with a nuggety center that is just the heart of this movie is, if you knew something devastating was going to happen in your life in 20 years, would you change anything? I mean, that's the core of this movie. Mm-hmm. And it's surrounded by all this fascinating information about aliens and language and how we communicate, and kind of an examination of human beings and what we respond to in crisis situations. But that is it. That is the center of the movie, and it's something that is like actually very simple in this very high concept, smart quote unquote sci-fi movie. The emotional core of it is a pretty simple philosophical question.
Yeah. Something that hit me this time emotionally, that I suppose it had hit me before, but it's almost like once you've seen it a few times, you become a little bit inured to the things that affected you the first time, but then that just opens you up to be affected by more things. And I kind of became more conscious of Jeremy Renner's character, and like follow, like, how you're like subsequent viewings of a movie, your scope kind of expands, and you pay attention to background details, and stuff like that, because you get it. And I was paying more attention to his character, and got really affected by the tragedy of his character, because it's essentially the same challenge that she faces. It's the same choice, really, but he doesn't get to make the choice. And in fact, when she tells him what's going to happen, he basically rejects the choice and like stays away from his kid.
Yeah,
which is
there's that really
sad.
There's that really tragic moment where Hannah, the child, says, "He doesn't look at me the same way anymore," mm-hmm. and that line on this watch affected me more too. That like, yeah, like she has made this terrible and difficult choice for herself, but he had no say in it. And not only he had, like, because of the way this language works and because of the way Louise perceives time, she kind of gets to enjoy all of the goodness in a way that he doesn't, because he doesn't perceive time that way. So like, it's a lot easier to make the choice when you're sitting there and someone says, do you want to have a baby? And yes, you can remember every single piece of heartache and every single bad time, but you also in that moment remember every single good time. All the goodness, all the happiness, all the love is in your mind simultaneously. So maybe it's easier to make that choice when you know all that's going to be there.
Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting. I'm struggling with how to phrase this, but you know, everyone in history who has had a child has known that their child would die.
Right.
Just hoped that it wouldn't happen before they died. So you're in a sense already accepting that heartache, even if you're not alive to experience it. It's still essentially something that you don't want to happen, but you accept will happen.
Yeah,
but
and that's the universality of it to me. Is, I mean, you have children, so I think this movie hits you on it hits you very close to home. I think. I don't have kids yet, but I do think there's something universal to the idea of every single person in this life, whether they are going to make kids or not, knows that life is going to be filled with pain to a level we can't even anticipate, a whole lot of love, and it's going to end. And more times than not, it's probably going to end in not a great way. Like, dying is often a terrible experience, and we all know this, and we go on anyway,
right?
Because what choice do you have? And that's one of the things I think this is fascinating to, when you break down the choice that she makes here. Did she really have a choice in that moment? Like, we could really dive into like the idea of free will versus determinism when you can see the future if we want to here. I don't think that necessarily matters to what the movie is saying, but it could be an interesting conversation. Yeah,
I mean, I think this is one of those things that's really hard to explain, but I think it makes perfect sense. It's just difficult to explain with words. Basically, if she were the kind of person who would have chosen to have her kid knowing that her kid would die, then she would find herself in the world where she has a kid, and then looking into the future sees that she has a kid and then decides to have the kid. If she were the kind of person who, in that circumstance, wouldn't have chosen to have the kid, then she would not see that future, because that wouldn't be the future that happened. It's just sort of extracting freedom of choice from the equation, and just looking at the results of what the person would do in a vacuum. I think that's probably the only way to look at it that doesn't result in some kind of circular paradox.
Yeah. But again, I don't think, and I've read some complaints about this movie from people that didn't like it, that really dove into that kind of stuff. And I don't think the movie is actually asking you to do that. I don't think the movie is asking to be examined on that kind of level. The emotional core of it is, here's a woman who was confronted with this choice and made it. And that's all that matters, is you're with her emotionally through that decision.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, like having children, like there's a lot about having children that's terrifying to everyone. Like the whole process of pregnancy is like fraught with risks. Having babies is fraught with a million different kinds of risks and things that you're not prepared for. And I don't know if that ever actually ends, actually. So it's not like that. I think to get to your point of it being relatable, everyone who has a kid, and even everyone who makes a big risky decision, is in the same place she's in, because she can see that the heartbreak is in the future. But really, anytime you make a risky choice, you are accepting that heartbreak either is in the future or very well could be. And so that, I think that's what grounds it and makes, because like it doesn't seem like it should be that emotional, right? You're like, oh, it's this weird story about this science fiction thing where a woman sees the future. It's hard to relate to, right? It's like, no, not really hard to relate to, because what it is, like all good science fiction, is it's a science fiction framing that exaggerates a omnipresent aspect of the human condition.
Yeah.
Like that's all the best sci-fi is, just to take Villeneuve's other, later film like Blade Runner, it's not about replicants being, like, who cares what a replicant really is? The point is the what it's trying to say about the human condition, not what it's trying to say about being an android.
Absolutely. And I think that's what science fiction can do that no other genre can really do, is extrapolate those kind of ideas in interesting ways. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the reason I love this movie. And at the center of all of this is Louise, which means at the center of all of this is Amy Adams. And I think she gives not only the performance of her career, but one of the best performances I've seen in the last few years. I think this movie completely relied on her, and it's not a big showy performance. That's why she didn't win the Oscar. I don't even think she was nominated for the Academy Award, actually. But she has to do so much to make this character work. This movie is kind of playing with us a little bit. It starts off with her having a child, and because we perceive time linearly, we assume that comes before the rest of the events in the movie until we get to that point where it's revealed to us. So we go through the entire movie seeing a sort of like sullen sadness on her and reading that as she's still recovering from losing her kid. But that's not actually what it is.
Right. Yeah. And the thing is, you can read, you read it all one way, not even sensing any ambiguity to it the whole way through the movie. You're like, yeah, this is what this, like you said, she must be mourning her kid. That's why she's so listless and sort of detached and drinking wine all the time. And then when she's having the quote unquote flashbacks later, you're like, oh yeah, she looks that expression on her face is clearly wistful mourning of her child. And then the subsequent times you watch it, you realize that she was just kind of a not bereft, that's not the right word, a drifting individual who was work obsessed and didn't really have any personal connections. That's actually why she behaves the way she does for the first part of the movie. And the expression on her face when she's having the flashbacks is confusion. And it just reads completely consistently both times through is the amazing thing.
Right. And that's not easy to do. I think that's extremely difficult to do. Mm-hmm. And I think she pulls it off so well. One of the things that I was paying extra close attention to this time around, though, was in those scenes at the very beginning of the movie when she has had the kid and she's holding her baby for the first time. Just like you said, when you go back and look at those, you could see happiness on her face, which I think there is. But you see moments of terror and sadness, because it's almost as if it's a person who has just realized that they have officially set into motion the end of this child's life. Mm-hmm. And there's a moment there, my wife actually caught it the first time. There's a moment where she's holding the kid and she goes to grab the baby's little tiny hand, and her hand is shaking. Mm-hmm. Her hand is shaking almost uncontrollably. And it's so subtle that you probably wouldn't even see it the first time around. But it's definitely there, and even if you did catch it the first time around, you could wave it off as just like the terror of being a new parent. But there's so much more to that action now that you know how the story unfolds. And I don't know if that was a directorial choice. I don't know if that's something Amy Adams added to the performance. I don't care. It works wonderfully either way.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I saw that on this viewing today, and I hadn't noticed that particular hand tremble before, and I was actually going to say that before you said.
Oh wow, that's cool.
Yeah, like, and I think that was absolutely, master craftsmanship there. Because I think when you actually have a kid, you're usually like sleep deprived and not like ruminating on the child's mortality. But in her situation, it's very plausible that, you know, she would have this level of like tension about it, and sudden awareness that this creature that she is now in love with, now that she knows this girl, that's, you know, that's what she's done. She's set this ball in motion, like you said.
Yeah. So you mentioned the framing a little bit, and I want to talk about that for a little bit. I know we could spend a whole hour on that, but one of the things I wanted to talk about this time is the lighting of this movie. And one of the things I noticed was that everything lit with humans is really like low light. It's very dark. There's kind of shadows over everything. Everything that's focused on the aliens is very, very bright, which of course the centerpiece of that is the window that they see them at, which is the entire source of light in that entire room. And that continues throughout the entire movie, that anytime there are humans standing around talking to each other, it's very muted. They don't use a lot of strong lighting. With the one exception is the window in Luis's house, I guess, which happens to also almost exactly mirror the window which she talks to the aliens through. But I thought that was it was a really good way of setting the mood and showing that through contact with these things is hope, is brightness, is a better time. Yeah.
It's, you know, all alien stories, all stories with aliens, all stories with the unknown play with this idea of creating tension as the characters are approaching the unknown thing, and making you unsure, making you nervous, putting you in the character's headspace. And what's fun about this movie, and maybe I'm just saying this because I've seen it multiple times now and kind of already knew that the aliens were benign, but like you simultaneously understand the terror of the characters who are going into the situation, but also the cues, like the visual cues you're being given regarding the aliens are very non-threatening, almost uniformly non-threatening.
Yeah.
Like even the times when like the alien makes a loud noise that's unexpected and everyone sort of starts, for some reason you feel situated such that you're like looking at the silly humans who are startled by, you know, Gorblax sneezing or whatever. Like I don't know. I always felt like the aliens were safe, and the movie was communicating to you that they were safe while also, you know, allowing you to empathize with the characters. And this is all done visually, of course, because there's no other way you could do it.
And I think part of the way that's achieved is through Luis, who I never thought, it never seemed to me that Luis ever really felt that the aliens were there to hurt anything. Like she always seemed like, and it's just because she's inquisitive and really wants to understand who they are and learn their language, that because you're kind of seeing the movie through her eyes, that we see the people freaking out at the aliens and the stress and concern as the whole world kind of loses their shit. But we're so focused and centered on Luis, whose only thing is learning how they speak, that I think that's what helped send that tone throughout it, that these guys aren't here to hurt us.
Yeah. And basically another thing that's story-wise doing that is you're situating yourself with Elise, and then this is in contrast and even in conflict with the soldiers who are, you know, like basically portrayed as being unreasonably hostile, and so you're subconsciously motivated to side with her. And I'm always interested in how either films or books convey mystery and the unknown, and I think it's a fascinating, topic of the art of storytelling is making someone feel genuinely intrigued about something that you have just made up in your head. You know, like it's not like these are real aliens, so any amount of anxiety you feel about meeting the aliens is purely an artifact of the filmmaker's creation. Like you're not actually learning anything about aliens. You're just completely enraptured with this film creation.
Yeah, and I think that's achieved from this through how well it holds the pace. We start the first meeting with them is slow, right? We take our time to get to the ship. We take our time for the scissor lift to rise up slowly, and then it slowly rises up. We take our time to see the gravity shift, and then they go see the aliens, and they talk for like 5 seconds, and then we're back at base camp. We don't even see them leave the ship. We don't see that process. We just move on. So it's like the buildup was there, and then the release was very quick. And then we kind of stagger and structure Luis's slow progress through understanding them, until we get to the kind of mid-movie sequence where we go to voiceover and basically do a montage. And I wanted to get your opinion on that, because one of the criticisms that I have seen of this movie is that is so like tonally different than the rest of the movie that it almost feels jarring. And I wondered what you thought.
I don't know. I didn't think it was jarring. I liked that as a way of conveying the exact kind of nerdy sci-fi details that I'm there for. Because it's actually really interesting. All of the stuff she's kind of teaching about, you're secretly learning about language and
right.
throughout the whole movie. And that particular voiceover sequence is basically a way of sort of rehearsing and reinforcing some of the information you already know, and then sort of bringing you to the next thing. And see, that's the thing. I think people who criticize stuff like that are not appreciating the complex interweaving ballet of what the movie is doing, because stuff later in the movie would not land properly if stuff earlier in the movie hadn't set it up exactly right.
Yeah. Not
too heavy-handedly and not so subtly that you didn't catch it. So I don't think you can just be like, oh, I didn't this particular scene. I'm like, okay, well, you can't go back and watch the movie without that scene. And I really think you're, hypothetical you person are underestimating how tightly fit of a jigsaw this is.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I did not mind the montage at all. I'm a sucker for voiceover, so I always like a voiceover scene in a movie. So maybe I'm not the best one to get critical of that thing. But I thought you're absolutely right that it worked at a much faster pace than you could do in a film. It worked at establishing a lot of the more sciencey stuff that the book definitely could get into, which the book does. The book really reads a lot more into the science of learning a language than the movie does, but that's because the movie doesn't really have time to do all that. But it achieves a lot of that in a series of montages and shows how we're making progress and how we're learning their language and how the learning of a language works. I really do love the scene where she writes down what is your purpose on the board and then like breaks down how all that would work to get someone to understand get someone else who doesn't speak your language to even understand what the meaning behind those words in that question are.
Yeah, I love that. I love stuff like that, like where she tells the story about kangaroo and then admits that it's a fake story.
Yeah.
Like that's about as much science as the audience has patience for. Like, and then they're like, okay, and then here's some other stuff in the voiceover, as we also establish that a lot of time is passing and that these characters are starting to get to know each other better, and move the ball forward, and then the next important thing happens. I didn't have any problem with it. Speaking of, here's the transition voiceover to sound. Speaking of sound, well, there's a lot to talk about with sound, but I wanted to specifically mention that first scene where they see the heptapods for the first time, and there's the bird, I guess it's a canary, in the cage, which is obviously there as, practically to serve as the warning if there's any sort of hazard, but emotionally is there to remind you that there's a potential threat present. And this canary is chirping its head off for the whole scene in this very like irritating, piercing, loud way that's intruding on your consciousness and reminding you like, hey, this could all go wrong. Basically that it's almost like a siren saying like, warning, could be poisonous. And the canary stops being so intrusive pretty much right when Luis starts like making progress.
Yeah.
And it transitions really, really well.
That's a great point. And to add on to that, that canary comes back. When Luis is having that dream where she sees the heptapod suddenly in her room, that canary noise, they mixed it back in. And like, that's perfect because it makes it feel otherworldly. It reminds you of the emotional tension of that first meeting when we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know what was going on. And it was just a brilliant move to bring that sound back.
Yeah.
In that way.
Speaking of that exact scene, and I don't even know if I'm right about this or if it was just my ear playing a trick on me, but like that when she wakes up, I believe she wakes up to like a door, someone knocking on a door sound. And that sound is like so close to one of the like snorting sounds that the heptapods make that it like could be either one. And I thought that was cool, assuming that's actually a real thing. I didn't make it up.
I'm sure you're right about that because that whole scene is very trippy.
Yeah.
I actually read about this. Part of that scene was created from an editing mistake. They used a wrong take and had like, Luis is talking to, what's his name? Jeremy Renner. Ian. Luis is talking to Ian and she's looking at him and he's standing on a certain side of the room. And then suddenly she's looking towards a different direction. She's looking in a different direction. She's looking in a different corner of the room. And then we cut to the heptapod being there. And that was actually just, they used a wrong take and she's in a take where he was positioned in a different part of the room. And it kind of creates this whole sense of unease. Like it adds to the dreaminess of it that the editing is kind of weird and choppy and like almost sloppy because you're like looking like she's not the dimensions of the room shift where we're going, where we think the characters are standing in the room shifts suddenly without any warning or any notice or any sense of movement created by the camera or by the blocking. And that's just weird. And you don't, this the kind of thing, unless you're like sitting down studying the movie, you might not notice, but it triggers an emotional reaction in you.
Yeah. No, yeah, I think you're right. And stuff like that and the bird sound coming back in there are your like warning, like something's off here. You should be confused. You should be paying attention to what's going on.
Yeah. Which I think that's what separates a good movie from a great movie is in a great movie, every single aspect of the film is working together to make something wonderful. It's not just the writing. It's not just the direction. It's not just the performances. It's all of those things. It's the sound. It's the editing. It's the score. We haven't even talked about Johan Johansson's score, which is just staggeringly beautiful.
Yeah.
And all of these things have to be working together and delivering their best work to make a great movie. And I feel like in this movie, they all are. Every one of these elements is coming together to create this thing that is beautiful and wonderful and impactful.
Yeah. Yeah. They're not all just great. They're all great and pointing in the same direction and sort of like guided in the same direction. And, you know, I never know exactly how much credit to give a director, but Villeneuve is definitely, you know, had created a couple of movies now that I would say qualify as great films where everything is pointing in the same direction in this way, and everything about them is great. And so I definitely think like a lot of the coherence of the film is due to him. That said, like you mentioned, it just wouldn't be the same if it weren't for Johan Johansson's score and Amy Adams' performance and everything like that. So
yeah.
We're just so lucky to have this movie, I think.
I know. I completely agree. Like I can't. There is not an element of this movie that I don't absolutely love, and even something like some of the critiques of this movie confuse me, to be honest with you. There's people that like really got up in arms about the moment where Luis meets with the Chinese general and gets his phone number and the message that she's supposed to send to him. And it's like people deciding to pick apart the timey-wiminess of the time travel. And I just feel like I don't want to tell people that they're watching a movie wrong, but if that's what you leave the movie like wanting to digest is how exactly that functionally would have worked, I just feel like you're doing it wrong.
And also, it's not like a contradiction. It's just like, hey,
No.
the movie didn't explain how this works. So for all you know, this is how it works. Okay.
Yeah.
Moving on. Like, okay, you know what? Here's my explanation for that. She's still learning the language, but hasn't learned it fully. So instead of purely perceiving time as a pure simultaneity, she jumps around a little bit, and she's on her way to the later stages. But right now, it's more like she's just jumping around in time. That makes perfect sense. You don't have to, like, there's not even really any need to explain that much, though, in the first place. You're just like, okay, all right. The conceit is that there's timey-wiminess. It's fine.
Yeah. So now I have to ask you the tough question, Matt.
Okay.
If you knew your kid was going to die of rare disease in 20 years, would you have still had the kid?
Yes. It's not even. I somehow managed to not ever actually ask myself that question, but it's not even a hard question.
See, I think that is beautiful, and I think as much as that is like devastating to know that, I think there's some beauty in there. There's some beauty in this idea that love and a relationship between a parent and a child is so strong and so beautiful and so unique that even knowing that thing's going to end someday would not change your decision to do it. I think that's wonderful. And I think if that's one thing that you can take away from this movie, I think it's that, because I think that's exactly how Louise feels at the end of it. And it's told through the beauty that is this movie. The moment when, I know we haven't talked about Jeremy Renner's character a lot, but the moment where she hugs him and says, "I forgot how good hugging you felt."
Yeah.
It's like just destroys me.
Yeah, and speaking of that, like I was gonna say, for the people out there who don't have kids, and like I can wax poetical about how how the way you love a kid is the way you love your own kid is like its own unique thing, but like I don't even need to, because I can just say, like, imagine your own loved one, your own closest loved ones, and imagine if you, before you met them, if you had known that they were gonna die in 10 years or whatever, would you still have wanted to meet them? And like I think most people's answer is going to be yes, pretty handily, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to speak for people, but I think that's kind of how we are wired as animals, is like, of course I would, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I agree. This movie.
Yeah.
I'm just getting emotional thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I've got Johansson's score playing in my head.
Don't do that to
on
yourself.
repeat. But it's so beautiful, though.
I know, like,
and
I've just like listened to that song, and just to like feel emotional, just to like have catharsis. And it's it's one of very few songs where I put it on and it completely takes me to that mental place, and not even the mental place of the film necessarily, just this harrowing, tragic space.
Yeah. So a lot of people, including our co-host and friend Michael, think Denis Villeneuve is a rather nihilistic storyteller, in that the movies he chooses usually end on a little bit of a sour note. Sicario did end that way. Prisoners did end that way. I will give him credit for that. And when he heard we were doing this podcast, he was like, "Oh, maybe I should watch this movie." No, I'll probably hate it because it's Villeneuve. I could definitely see an interpretation of this movie where they said that's a depressing outlook, but also No way.
Yeah,
like
well,
I think the message of this is beautiful and hopeful and bright. It matches the bright lighting on the aliens. That it's positive.
yeah, it's the most positive spin on fatalism that you could ever make. I mean, it is fatalistic, but it's almost like saying, even if fatalism is quote unquote true, that doesn't mean we have to be miserable about it.
Right.
I was gonna say something. Sorry.
Is it a non-zero sum game?
Yes, this movie is a non-zero sum game.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think it depends on your attitude toward grief and death, because like I think about Up quite a lot actually, and I wrote an essay about Up where I compared it to the Little Prince CGI film, which no one saw.
Because it was not very good.
It was not, but the point is, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, like, the first time I saw Up, I was like destroyed and just so sad, and so sad at the beginning, so sad again at the end, and sort of almost felt like the ending was a not the ending didn't make up for how sad it was and how tragic it was. And I just kind of walked out of the theater completely preoccupied with the story of the main character and his loss. Mm-hmm. And I don't, not to put too fine a point on it, but I think that was an immature attitude. And I had to watch the movie 75 more times because my kids love it. And once I became adjusted to the tragedy of it, I was able to appreciate, like, hey, this is actually a really beautiful idea about how, you know, this guy had this wonderful life and he loved his wife and she passed away, and he has to move on and honor her while continuing to have a life. And it's like, it's sad, but it doesn't need to like ruin your day. Like it's something that you can grapple with and actually feel better about. And the reason I have this lengthy aside about Up is, like, I think that your attitude about grief and death can influence how you feel about a movie like Up or about a movie like this. So yeah, I can actually imagine someone watching this movie and being like, God, what a depressing movie. Because it is really sad, but I don't think it's depressing. Yeah.
But like death is an inevitability, whether you can see 20 years into the future or not. Like, we're all going to die, and what this movie says is that doesn't take away from the life that you live.
Yeah,
and it's the life that you live, the love that you have is worth it.
Yeah,
even with death, and that's great.
Yeah,
I can get behind that, because I am terrified of dying. I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I like living too much, but I, like everyone else on this planet, knows that it's going to happen eventually.
I mean, I super hope that we actually do reach longevity, escape velocity, and don't. But I'm also you know, not so. I'm preparing myself for the reality that we might not. So yeah, it's something that every human in history has had to grapple with, and so I think it's definitely like a worthy thing to think about regardless.
Yeah, and there's a reason why one of the big things we talk about in stories is dealing with the idea of either losing people we love or our own mortality, because it is something we think about constantly, we're scared about constantly, and one of the things stories can do is get you to a place of acceptance. Feels like the wrong word, because like I feel like a lot of people hear acceptance and they think this, like, oh, you're giving up, you know, but I mean, that's really what it is. It's acceptance. It's this idea that whether or not you're going to die is out of your control.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, there's probably some perfect word for it, but I think acceptance is fine. You like, basically we all have to get to a point where we're not just like in constant literal terror about this idea. So yeah, everyone has their own mechanisms for it.
I'm just bummed about all the Marvel movies I'm going to miss.
Yeah. all the thousands and thousands.
Oh, there's gonna be so many
marching off into the endless intergalactic future.
Oh boy. All right. Anything else you want to talk about? I guess I need to say that Johan Johansson passed away in February, which I still can't believe that happened.
Yeah.
And he was 48 years old.
That was really sad. And that, like, maybe this is a bit of a cynical thought. I don't know. It didn't feel like it was mean at the time, but I was like, what a loss, like, in terms of all of the beautiful things that this man would have made that won't get made now.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. I think he was a composer that was really at the top of his game.
Yeah.
And he's got some movies coming out this year. Mary Magdalene, he did the score for that, which is supposed to be an interesting movie that I really want to see.
Cool.
But yeah, it's hard to imagine another Denis Villeneuve movie without him, since he's done so many of his films.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that was sad.
Yeah. But he will be eternal through his music. Look at that. That's a hopeful outlook on death.
Yeah, we did it.
It's the best we can do. It's the best we can do. Yeah, so that's, I don't know. Do you have anything else about Arrival? I love this movie to death.
Yeah.
I could talk about it for another hour.
I know. Those are all the things that I kind of walked away from this viewing with. And it's the kind of movie where I feel like as soon as we get off the line, I'm going to be thinking about it and be like, oh yeah, I wanted to talk about, the cool alien design or spaceship design, but it's like, yeah, I mean, a lot of it is just like self-evidently great. So you barely need to even talk about it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and this is a movie that absolutely rewards rewatches. I mean, obviously, like the second rewatch is probably the one that's going to pay off the most because you know the twist. But I can't tell you how surprised I am at each new thing that I learn when I revisit this movie.
Yeah, I agree.
It's just one of those films. Thanks, Denis. Keep making movies. I hope Dune is as good as this.
Yes, me too. I'm so excited about this, even though I don't even know if there's like any chance it'll happen. Yes.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows? All right, that's Arrival. Matt, let's talk about what we've been watching.
Yeah.
That.
All right.
What have you been watching? What have I been watching? Well, I asked you first, so you better tell me.
Well, since last week, I've talked before about this podcast I like, the Jocko podcast, from Jocko Willink, a Navy SEAL commander who served many distinguished tours. I don't know what the words are for that. And is basically a hero. But anyway, he does his podcast where he sort of gives like advice and also does like very detailed, deep readings of like history books, usually military history books. But I'm not recommending the Jocko podcast today because I've recommended that in the past. What I'm recommending is the Warrior Kid podcast from Jocko, which is another Jocko podcast, but it's a separate podcast. And
this counts.
And so Jocko wrote The Way of the Warrior Kid, which is like a short chapter book about a kid who basically has all of the same problems that normal kids have. And then his Uncle Jake comes to live with him, and his Uncle Jake is a Navy SEAL. And his Uncle Jake helps him with all of his problems using very like straightforward, useful advice. And I read this book to my kids a while back, and so now he started the Warrior Kid podcast, which is basically his podcast where he does the same thing as he does for his normal podcast, except aimed at kids. And all the questions he answers are like, the types of things that kids would struggle with. And so this is the first podcast my kids have listened to, and seems like they understand most of what's going on and they enjoy it. And I think I'll be making this a fixture of our car rides.
That's awesome. Get the kids in on the podcast early. It's the wave of the future.
Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about when they should start theirs.
You What's it gonna be about, Matt?
I don't know. I mean, probably like toys or
Yeah.
PJ Masks.
Wait, what is that?
PJ Masks is a cartoon, like a CGI cartoon, with like 3 5-year-olds who are an owl,
Okay.
a gecko, and a cat, respectively, with superpowers, and they fight. I mean, just fill in the blank. It's
Gotcha.
one of those.
I saw you tweet about it the other day, and I was like, I don't know what that is. I should have known it was some kid thing.
Yeah, it's on Netflix, so that's yeah. They love it.
Speaking of Netflix, I wanted to talk about A Series of Unfortunate Events real quick, because season 2 of that show came out last weekend, I believe, and we finished watching it last week. And I don't know if you watched the first season, Matt, at all.
Didn't even know it was a show.
Yeah, it's a show starring Neil Patrick Harris on Netflix. There were 10 episodes last year and 10 more this year, and it's really, really good. It's really good.
Okay.
It's Neil Patrick Harris having a great time getting to dress up as all the different characters. Kind of like he's doing it different from Jim Carrey, obviously. Did you ever see that movie, the Jim Carrey Lemony Snicket
No,
version?
not like all the way through.
Yeah, that wasn't very good.
Okay.
But this is, it's having a great time. It's very clever. The writing is so clever, and it makes you laugh. Neil Patrick Harris is great. All the other guest stars that appear on the different episodes are really good. Patrick Warburton plays Lemony Snicket, which is just perfect. I don't know if you recognize that name,
No.
but you will recognize him as the deep-voiced man.
Okay.
He was on Seinfeld. He was Kronk in Emperor's New Groove.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
I love him.
Yeah. So it's just like so increasingly clever and funny. The formula of the show wore on me a little bit. Like the basic concept of this entire show is that these 3 orphans, their parents die mysteriously in a fire, and this guy called Count Olaf is trying to get them and kill them so he can steal their fortune. And they keep getting shuffled around to different relatives or friends of their parents that were part of some secret organization. And it's silly, while still being like really dark, because like their parents died in a fire and this man's trying to actively kill them, and the relatives that they normally end up staying with end up dead by the end of the show because Olaf kills them. But it's so like, I can't even think of the right word for the type. It's definitely black humor, but it's just very clever and well shot. Like the set decoration, the costumes, everything that's done on it is just working. Like it's a really, really wonderful show. I could not recommend it more.
I love stuff that walks that knife edge of black comedy tone.
Yeah, it definitely does.
That sounds fun.
And it features Patrick Warburton at the beginning of every episode saying, "Hey, this is sad. Don't watch this. It's really sad."
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else you've been watching, seeing, or going to recently?
Yeah, I spent the weekend hanging out with the McElroys.
Well, that sounds fun.
And by hanging out, I mean I paid money to go see their live shows
That still
and
sounds.
sit in the
That
audience.
still sounds fun.
Yeah, so they came to Dallas this past week, and they had a Adventure Zone podcast on Friday, and my brother and me on Saturday, and I went to both of them.
Of course you did.
Of course I did. Why not? How often do they come to Dallas?
Yeah.
I don't even know. Maybe once a year.
Yeah. I have no idea how often they come to Denver, but I would
Yeah.
still be hella excited to see them.
Yeah, it was of course a blast. When they do the Adventure Zone, which is something we talked about a lot on this podcast, they do like one-off things where they just take their 3 characters and just do something fun with it. I'm not going to spoil it because it's going to come out and you're going to love it.
Okay.
But it was a lot of fun. It was goofy. It was irreverent. It was everything you wanted. You wouldn't think that there'd be that much more improvement to seeing them record these things, because like we've listened to them for hours and get so much enjoyment out of just their conversations via audio. But there really is something to watching the expressions on their faces as they do things. Watching the exasperation on Griffin's face as they completely ruin all his plans by doing something just absurd and ridiculous. It increases the enjoyment of it so much. And of course, like, you're in a crowd who's all pumped up for it, so the funny stuff is even more funny when you're laughing along with 2,000 other people. And it's just, if they come to your town, whether it's My Brother and Me or Adventure Zone, I cannot recommend it enough. It's an experience that I think anyone that's a fan of the McElroys should take up.
Well, that sounds awesome. Yeah, I mean, that would be my question, would be like, what is different versus just listening to it? And it sounds like seeing the expressions in their faces would get you a long way. I mean, comedy works a lot better when you can see the person's face. That's generally true, I think.
Yeah, and it's the stand-up factor. Like, whenever, like, if you're sitting at home watching a stand-up performance on Netflix, you might laugh at some funny stuff, but if you're in that audience, you're going to be laughing your ass off.
Yeah.
It's just like maybe it's groupthink. I don't know exactly how it works, that when you're with other people, things are just more funny. I don't understand it, but it is absolutely the truth.
Right. Yeah. It's like the first time I saw Team America in a theater, I'm pretty sure people were screaming, including me.
Yeah. So yeah, do that. See them. They're touring right now.
Yeah.
I think they're actually in Houston tonight. The show that they've been begging people to go to because apparently they were having trouble selling tickets.
That's strange.
Hey, y'all, come to Houston, please. It is kind of crazy seeing this thing that they started, this small tiny thing, and how big it's gotten. Like the Adventure Zone, people were in cosplay. People love this stuff, and it's kind of they've built a community, and people are responding to it. It's great.
I mean, so there really like thousands of people at these events.
I believe the max of the theater, the theater holds around 3,000 people. I don't know if they sold out, but they were very close. So I'm being conservative and saying over 2,000.
That really, I mean, even if that's anywhere close to true, that's just an enormous number of people to go watch a live Dungeons and Dragons campaign.
Yep.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
Good for them.
It's incredible. I'm jealous.
Yeah.
We're coming for you, McElroys.
That's right. Soon, actually.
We're equally funny.
Yeah, and we've got plans, man.
Oh no. Yeah, we do have plans. I'm excited about those plans that we can't talk about except to be vague.
Yep.
Right now.
But
okay.
Yeah.
This is the end. That is all we had for you guys this week. If you have any questions or comments or just want to tell us what you thought of Arrival, you can reach out to us via email at dailyplanetfilms@gmail.com or on Twitter at dailyplanetfilms. Let us know what you thought of Arrival. Did you love it as much as we do? We did, always will.
And
I don't know how time works anymore.
Currently, this moment, which is eternity.
Yes,
yeah,
that's true.
Yeah, if you're not already subscribed to this podcast, we encourage you to do so and ensure you never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else podcasts are sold.
Yes, we have tons of great shows on this feed and on all our other feeds. And if you want to check out what those feeds are, you can go over to dailyplanetfilms.com. We got some questions last week, Matt, about why Vow to View episodes weren't appearing on the new feed. Which it wasn't just you.
Oh,
because some other people were like, "Why isn't this on your feed anymore?" And we're like, "Oh, because we have a new one. We have each of our 3 recurring shows are now on their own feeds. So you can subscribe to those at your leisure, and you can check out all of those at dailyplanetfilms.com, or you can search them on any of your podcatchers of choice.
Yeah, cool. Also
you can also
go ahead.
Patreon.
Yeah,
sorry, I skipped a thing.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you can go to Patreon. If you want to support us, what we do, you can pledge $1 a month or whatever else you can afford to help ensure we keep making new stuff. This whole episode exists because of Patron Aimee, who was so generous to donate to us at that $20 level. Thank you so much, Aimee. I hope we did a rival justice. I thank you for the opportunity to talk about this movie. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And please consider rating and reviewing us on iTunes also. Every review helps us get more exposure and introduces new people to the content we make here.
And when we get those, we will read them out loud, if that's a consideration. Do you think it is? I don't know. Do people like that or not? I don't know.
I think they do, actually. Yeah, no, I know for a fact they do.
We will read it out loud.
Yeah.
That's all we have for you guys this week. Next week, Matt and I are bringing back the Deconstructing Director series. We talked about this long enough, Matt. It's time to actually bring it back.
Okay.
We're going to dive into the work of the Wachowski sisters. We're going to be looking at all of their feature-length films one by one. And I can't wait. I've already watched half of them in preparation for that podcast, and I can't wait to get to the other half. It's going to be a good time, especially the ones that I hadn't seen yet.
Cool. I look forward to filling out my watching list.
All right, guys. Check that next Monday, and we will see you then.
Podcast is over. It's done. We hope you all had some fun. Go back to your work or your school. Maybe the gym. Hey, that's cool. Regardless, just go away. But please come back next Friday. There'll be a brand new podcast for free. Please don't sue us, DC Comics. I did it wrong.
Your watching list?
Strong finish.
Your watching list?
I was trying to work the word oeuvre into it, but then I realized that that's not what I meant to say. So